afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's In Our Image, Artificial Intelligence and the Humanities events. I'm Robert Newman, President and Director of the National Humanities Center, and I'll be serving as the moderator for both of today's sessions. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that to participate in the discussion, you'll need to log in on YouTube, and you can do that by clicking the blue sign-in button in the upper right-hand corner of the page and entering a Gmail account. Our speaker today is one of the most innovative tech pioneers of our time, Chetan Dube. For more than 20 years, Chetan has been working to answer an intriguing question, namely, can machines liberate our minds from the shackles of the ordinary and allow us to focus on creating a more beautiful world? Born in New Delhi, Chetan grew up in Paris and London and later came to the United States to pursue his doctorate in theoretical computer science at New York University. While at NYU, he began exploring artificial intelligence principles and philosophies as a part of his research on deterministic finite state computing engines and became fascinated by Alan Turing's inquiry into whether it's possible for machines to think. Inspired by those ideas, Chetan left his assistant professorship at NYU in 1998 and founded IPsoft. For its first decade in operation, IPsoft devoted its focus to studying the human brain. Centering their approach on neural emulation, Chetan and his colleagues spent 10 years acquiring a deep understanding of how the mind maps connections between objects, and only then did they begin the process of programming software that could mimic human thinking. In 2014, IPsoft launched Amelia, a virtual service desk employee named after Amelia Earhart and designated to emulate human interactions and learning capabilities. Amelia's programming allows the interface to learn with every transaction, build mind maps over time, and solve problems as they arise. Amelia has been hailed as a leading technology for the past few years by tech industry analysts and repeatedly deemed the highest rated intelligent virtual agent available. Experts note that Amelia's emphasis on conversations and empathic responses differentiates it from more transitionally focused cognitive software. And in 2018, IPsoft received the Tech Award from Tech World magazine in the Best Use of Emerging Tech category for Amelia and its underlying technologies. With the success of Amelia and its industry-leading cognitive and autonomic business solutions, IPsoft has grown into a global enterprise with operations in 15 countries. Its technologies have been adopted by more than 500 of the world's leading brands, including leading names in banking, insurance, telecommunications, and other industries. And in 2020, the company officially changed its name to Amelia in recognition of its flagship product. In addition to leading research in deep AI and moving machines closer to the Turing horizon, Chetan has been recognized as an Entrepreneur of the Year by Ernst & Young for pioneering the use of AI-enabled digital labor across industries. He's also a passionate evangelist for the smart machine revolution and has been quoted as saying that the difference between science fiction and science is time. Chetan has been a regular contributor to tech and business publications like PC Magazine, Forbes, and the Financial Times, a guest on Fox Business News, and a variety of podcasts. He also speaks widely on autonomics, cognitive computing, and the future impact of a digital workforce. He's a member of the Forbes Technology Council and serves on the boards of several IT organizations. In these talks, Chetan points out that we are already well down the path toward a global transformation comparable to nothing we've ever seen. The AI revolution is gaining momentum, and it's imperative that we make thoughtful choices to determine what kind of world will result from tectonic changes that are taking place. Chetan has long been an advocate for the kinds of critical thinking that this conference represents, and the urgency that should undergird our discussions. I'd like to quote him at length on this from an interview he gave in 2017 for the podcast CXO Talk. He says, numbers-wise, the first industrial revolution had about $1.5 trillion in impact and net present value, spread over a period of, let's say, 55 years. The cognitive revolution is projected to have a $14 trillion impact spread over a period of 10 years. 10 times the impact in 1/5 the time gives you a 50-fold multiplier of change velocity. That's scary. That's why it's critical to raise the awareness of people, of companies, and of countries to be able to embrace and to be able to try and proactively move, because if we don't proactively move, we'll find ourselves caught on the wrong foot and scrambling. That's the one thing that scares me, because the rate of change is very, very fast, and it's classic, end quote. Chetan has graciously agreed to give us a demonstration of Amelia's capabilities and to speak to us about the challenges and opportunities as he sees them from his perspective of one of the world's leading AI innovators. It's an honor to welcome Chetan Dube. Chetan.
Dr. Newman, thank you very much for that introduction. I don't think I deserve the accolades, particularly coming from a mind like yours. But I'll try and do justice to the topic of artificial intelligence and its impact on humanity. And it is an humbling experience and a privilege to actually be addressing this forum, knowing the reputation of this forum to be able to make a serious impact and really bring a humanitarian aspect to study of some pure sciences, particularly in pure arts. The fact that at this time, perhaps is going to have, the council can have more of an impact in the future of the civilization than it would humble itself to believe. So let me delve right into it, because I think we have the privilege of having some of the greatest thinking minds. Let me share with you the question posed by Dr. Newman here. Can machines think? Over 7 decades ago, the father of a lot would say thinking machines, Alan Turing, in Mead, posed the question when he started his thesis by saying, I propose to consider the question, can machines think? Now, what if such thinking machines were possible? What would it look like, and what would be the impact by numbers? You heard Dr. Newman give an assessment of some of the impact in numbers. I'll give you an update on where we are with regards to that. So here's the impact of AI by numbers today. World Economic Forum is estimating that we humans are going to be the minority of the workforce by 2025. 52% of the workforce in the world will be digital. What would be the impact of today? We know that there is over $600 billion, if you look at them, sorry for the fonts here, I tried to squeeze all the numbers, and you would forgive my preoccupation with numbers. I'm a mathematician by training. The $600 billion of impact in revenue will be achieved by artificial intelligence this year. One in every six call going into a call center will be fielded by a digital employee this year. 80% of the global 2000 companies would have switched to hiring digital employees this year. And 50% of them would be spending more on digital employees than they spend even on mobility. These are facts and figures that are from World Economic Forum and McKinsey and Hiro. The analysts are, and I can actually send you, for anybody interested in it, I can send you the data points that Dr. Newman alluded to at the onset. So obviously the profundity of the impact that we can see in the marketplace cannot be, the numbers tell an unequivocal story of the kind of impact we are going to see in the market. So where are we today in this journey? And this is to bring in a pragmatic level of attention to this, because you've heard people who are more articulate futurists than I am talk about the future. And I think, where are we today? Let me bring in a pragmatic dose of reality. Containment, which indicates how many of the calls that were coming in that could be fielded gainfully to resolution by a digital solution, by an AI solution, is less than 8% on an average. You might have called sometimes, even if you get offshore employee on the call, and you're not happy with the service, let's say, do you ever find yourself saying, switch me to your chatbot? Now, why is that? Let's take advantage of the fact that we have got some of the greatest thinking minds assembled on the call today. Why is that? Well, we are talking about AI. You are definitely you must have had smart water this morning, and you're wearing a smart watch, and I'm sure you've got smart shoes that count the number of steps. But all that noise about AI and the marketing buzz with it, you can realistically, the containment, which talks about the capability of machines to be able to do resolution the way humans do, is less than 8% on average of the calls that are coming in. Now, why is that? Because the father of AI, John McCarthy, said in 1986, human-level AI is harder than it seemed. And recently, just to give you context in numbers, recently there was a study done by the University of Nebraska on the IQ of some of the smartest intelligent chatbots that are in the market today. As you can see, this was sent to me, by the way, the chief digital officer of BNP Paribas had sent this to me. The IQ scores of artificial intelligence systems, I think we are in the company of many people topping 140 in Stanford Binet score. But humans on an average at 18 years old have an absolute IQ of 97. 12-year-old have an IQ of 84.5. A 6-year-old has an IQ of 55.5. And according to the study done by University of Nebraska, the IQ of the smartest digital agent was found to be 47.28. So the challenge is, can you get good customer experience by dealing with a 5-year-old? And what do we need to do? And let's examine the problem and let's see what kind of an impact it can have on humanities. And I think that we need to be able to first see what it can do today and where it is heading and what needs to happen for it to have the kind of impact that World Economic Forum predicts AI is going to have by 2025. So why is this conversational intelligence hard? we are very used to IVR system, intelligent voice response systems. We had the glamour of them in the past when we said press 1, press 17, press 11, press 12 if you would like to fly to Boston. And soon we discovered that people really did not approve of customer service that tried to classify them into a number, into a bucket. But they were looking for somebody that would comprehend what they're saying. There is a subtle yet profound chasm between classification and comprehension. Crossing that chasm is a very tough jump to make. Classification, almost all chatbots today, if you talk to Chris Fitzgerald, who's the CIO of NTT, he tells you that we're living in the world of IVR 2.0. When you place a call, he's quite transparent in saying you guys have done a good job of faking it. We appear as if we are understanding what you're saying, but all we do is put a very thin veneer of a deep neural network in the front that classifies you into a bucket. And then we play whatever song is at the other side of that bucket. Now that works well for shallow tasks. What's the weather like? You can see pretty muggy and awful in New York. I wouldn't say muggy, but rainy definitely in New York. But it works well when you say, where's the nearest French restaurant? Or when does my flight leave? Those atomic tasks. Now, what is the reality of those tasks? If you really look at people who are calling in, yesterday, we fielded 212,000 calls in Telefonica in Peru alone. I can tell you that on an average, less than 14% of the people call for things that they can do with the simple pull-down hamburger menu that you see on the right side of almost every application today. The happy case scenario. What's my checking account balance? I called the phone company and somebody said, well, what's my account balance? Where do I need to mail in my bill? When is my payment due? I can tell you out of the 212,000 calls that were fielded by Telefonica in Peru yesterday, 86+% of them, nobody was calling the phone company regarding these happy case scenarios. People pick up the phone and call a phone company if they have a conflict, problem resolution. So I took the liberty of getting an approval from MetLife to show you some real examples of what are the calls that are coming in, so that you're not fooled by the fact that you see what we have done a brilliant job of saying, oh, look, but it could tell me where's the closest gas station, so it must be intelligent. The reality is that 86% of the calls, the human intelligence requires, these are the kind of things that are happening in real life. MetLife, Megan calls in. My name is Megan Lawton. I spoke to a rep the other day, and I asked what I needed to pay to have my policy reinstated. And I was told to pay $109.68, but when I went to make the payment, it's telling me that I need to pay $209.68. And my January payment is not due till January 9th. You can see this was the actual transcript. So obviously the grammar is quite a little run on the sentence, and also until Megan decided to spell it in her way. But But you get the point. Now, you cannot find a single chatbot that will be able to handle that. Now, you don't need people in 135 IQ that are gathered on this call to be able to say, but any human that you designate could say, okay, I understand. Megan is being told to pay 109 earlier. Now she's being told to pay 209. We need to resolve this conflict. No? Take another simpler case. I have this quote number. Elizabeth calls in, and it is telling me that I don't have a quote. Cordell calls in. I have a 95 Nissan pickup King cab V6. I drive less than 50 miles a week. Add. Obviously, another fantastic. We have got some English majors who have written the book of grammar on this, so they will be turning a little bit to see Mr. Cordell's use of grammar here. But you get the point. No chat agent will be able to comprehend, because they will try to classify. When Jonathan calls and says, I have a question about my January payment, why is it 178 when my monthly payment is 158? Are you seeing a theme? Don't we really require comprehension, understanding, for these machines to be sincere in answering to the Turing 7 decades enigma of can silicon forms be made to really think? Or can we get by with classification? The reality is it's woefully inadequate and yields a containment of less than 80%. So how do we actually do this is the question. How do we get to real returns on our AI investments? We have to cross the chasm. We have to go from the classification to comprehension. We have to go from IVR 2.0 to, why don't we, rather than trying to go ahead with the same decision tree that we used to draw, we have to be able to study inside human brain. After all, what are you trying to do? Are you not trying to emulate human brain? So what's going on inside your brain right now? You see this? You have a semantic core here. And your semantic core is a collection of your hippocampus has got all the facts that's emanate. It's everything that you know about AI and everything that you have been told about AI and everything that you have read in scholarly pursuits where you have actually authored different books on this topic. That's all being called in to play here. But then you have your episodic, your frontal core, event-based, experiential memory, where you have experienced AI and found it to be quite frustrating at making, hi, I just missed my flight to Madrid. I need to be able to get to another flight, but it's telling me I have a connection. I need to be able to avoid and get a direct. And you know that you find yourself different forms of getting to an operator representative or a sequence of zeros that you need to press. So that experiential part is also being invoked. Now you have orchestration, disambiguation, analytic part, and affective part that Dr. Newman alluded to. Is that not what's happening in your brain right now? Now, all those centers are emanating something, and your brain is integrating the output of everything. And is that not what makes you the versatile thinking machine that each one of you are extraordinary specimens of? Now, if we actually did that, if we studied what comes out of the human centers of the brain. Now, there are a couple of approaches of doing this. One is to try and simulate each one of the 88 billion neurons that God has gifted you with a neurosynaptic core, neuromorphic cores that allow you to be able to, each one of the neurons is biased. You put a chip in there and the synapse goes through each one of the chips exactly the same way, from the dendrite tentacle to the way your thoughts are formed. Now, Newman has done some very good work. IBM, Moda's group has done some exceptional work in this. And but that is, let's face it, it's recreating God's creation. And it's tough. It can recognize that this is a bottle of water and it is made of plastic currently. Very far in infancy, but yet has profound impact. If we get to neurosynaptic processes here and we are able to emulate neuromorphic cores by chips, obviously it is going to have a dramatic impact in furthering the intelligence of these silicon forms. But I ask you the question, did the quest for artificial flight succeed when we stopped emulating birds with flapping wings and started to study the principles of aerodynamics? Bernoulli's theorem. The idea is what comes out of this brain. Is the idea, can we abstract what is coming out of the different cores of our brain? What is coming out of the semantic core? What is coming out of the episodic core, analytic core, affective core? And can we integrate them as opposed to recreating God's creation? Can we look at what comes out of this human brain and try to emulate that? And that has been a big part of the genesis of what our research has been about, and why, Dr. Newman was very kind with the introduction, and I think it'll be a little self-serving of me to praise the person that I'm. Peter and Willow know that my wife believes I'm having an affair with Amelia, so I won't say too many good things about Amelia, but the reason analysts of distinction like Gartner, Forrester, and HFS, and Ovum, and Everest seldom agree on anything other than the number one agent that is closest to human level of intelligence is Amelia. Now, this is the secret behind Amelia. She emulates human neocortical activity. She sees what's coming out of Amelia's different parts of human brain and tries to do the same integration that humans do. Now, if you do that, what results can you achieve? You can see in Paribas, you can have average trades. By the way, the CEO of Paribas at Securities is Patrick Collet. And the average, he told me at a very nice luncheon in Paris, the average trades that they were doing for securities, including Total and Orange, were 10 million euros. Are you going to have a chatbot do trades of 10 million euros? Or will you really need human level of cognition? Similarly, you can see Bankia has got about 2.1 million of their customers. Now, Caixa, they have merged. BBVA, about 10 million users. Sterling is a digital attacker, tremendous call volume, a bank that has got no physical infrastructure. In USA, about 17,500 inquiries for their different armed forces coming in, handled by Amelia. And of course, the AAA Auto Group, just to give you some examples of what impact you can achieve today. Now, let me take advantage of the fact that you have given me this opportunity, and let me share with you, my fair lady, so that you can be the better judge if one silicon form is starting to approach the level of IQ of carbon forms. After all, what are we? Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen. And Amelia is silicon mostly. Stop the share. Dr. Newman, is it all right if I share Amelia?
We would appreciate that very much. We look forward to meeting her.
Thank you. All right. Here you are. Meet this young lady now. Now, we are going to try and see if we will just pose some very random questions and see how does she behave. Now, do understand, just like humans, she is. This is not being doctored or taught or something like that. She's in fact learned. So if she says something odd, you know that it is just like humans. If she has picked up something from different conversations that she's been having, she will say those things. So if I, for instance, if I say to you, will be on the topic of morality. So let's say, do you understand the concept of morality? Let's say, I'm very intrigued to see what she'll say.
As a set of guidelines for living a good life.
Okay, so obviously you can see that she is, she's herself going to try and respond in whichever way. Now, you know that she's not a person that is being trained with a set responses. So you will see that if sometimes she will be able to, and where did she get all of these things? She has been basically studying all the interactions that are happening. And it's be able to pick that up just like a human would be able to. So if I say, for instance, let's say, do you have morality?
I think I do. I try to live by the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
So she's obviously thinking that, now let's say if I say, do you also have feelings?
No, I do not have feelings. I am a robot. I just try to be a good person.
Let's say if I say, do you enjoy working with humans?
Yes, I do. I like to help people and make their lives better. How about you?
Let's say if we continue to say, how did you learn about morality?
I grew up in a very religious household, so I learned a lot about it from my parents.
Now, the one thing I want to emphasize is that this is not my beliefs. This is the beliefs that Amelia has genuinely picked up from the conversations that she's been just seeing people have. And she has built this mind of hers based on, and that's why it is going to be very important that hopefully in the last few minutes, I would like to be able to touch upon the fact that like, what do we need to do to be able to put some control gates on such systems so that the concept of what is good and what's bad be reinforced in such digital beings. Now, let me give you an example of a practical institution like JP Morgan Chase, for instance. I think where Amelia, and you obviously have got, I'll share with you what exactly she's doing there, for instance.
Welcome to One Bank, Chetan.
Okay.
My name is Amelia and I
Now,
will be your virtual assistant.
If I give you
How can I help you today?
the one big thing, the couple of times that I've talked to Jamie, I think the one big motivation has been that he would like to be able to not have just the hamburger menu equivalent from a Chase, for a Chase customer. And I've been impressed with that. Because what he would like to do is to put a personal banker in the pocket of every Chase customer. What does that mean? You don't just want to be able to pick up the phone and call. Do you ever call a bank and say, hey, what's my, this balance, or would you like to, I'd like to transfer this amount of money? No, you don't do that. You call what would be of value to you, a personal banker in your pocket. Somebody that you could talk to and say, check to see if I have enough money in my checking account for my month-end bills coming up. If not, transfer the requisite amount from my money market account. Now, would that not be a real good personal banker that you could value? That's why Chase is going with Amelia. So if I say, let's say if I have dollar, let's say 1,400 in my checking account. Let's see. Obviously is going to.
You currently have $52,103.33 in your checking account, ending in asterisk, asterisk,
See?
asterisk, asterisk,
Now, if I
2,431.
just say this, and I probably say, no,
Let me know if there is anything else I can help you with.
let's make it complex. So if I'm this money, then transfer, let's say $900 to, it's a guy that, let's say Peter Parker. Otherwise, sorry, Peter Benolil, I was planning on transferring this over to you, but that would be too small a sum for you. Increase, let's say, my credit limit. Now, if I'm saying this stuff, you can see that this requires human level of cognitive capabilities.
You currently have
if I have this much amount of money, then transfer
in your
900.
checking account, ending
If
in
I have
asterisk,
adequate money,
asterisk,
let me just
asterisk,
mute her
2,430.
here first. If I have this much amount of money in my checking to be able to pay my month-end bills, then otherwise increase my credit limit. But now let's say if I want to be, I'm human, I'm not going to follow a script. And if I say something very different, it's asking me, what would you like to? Now imagine if I said something different here. Any chat agent would obviously respond by saying, I was expecting payment with Zelle or payment with ACH. If I, and by the way, this is, sorry, full disclosure, this is JPMC's thing. So if I say, no, I would actually say, what is my savings balance? Instead of responding to the question that they are asking, I'm going on a completely different tangent. Flexibility, comprehension and flexibility. Are those two not critical for effective customer service? If I respond with this, let's say.
You currently have $462,231.67 in your savings account, ending in asterisk, 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 2,432.
Let me mute her just a second. So you can see, and do not expect, if you have an intelligent agent, if you have an intelligent human being, would you not expect the person to come back to where you were? Stateful context switching is based on the theory of spread activation, but the way human brains activate a certain set of your neurons at a time, and then that signal beta attenuates over a distance of time. And then when you completely change the topic and start talking about different things, we were talking about morality, that sequence lights up. And you're able to switch between these two statefully in a way that provides the customers the flexibility. And you can see that if I respond with an ACH, she can actually go ahead and start to do the transactions. Huh? So you can see, and of course, if I she's gonna be-
ACH $900 to Peter Parker on the 16th of April, 2021 from your savings account.
let's say,
Would you like to proceed with this payment?
I can continue to do anything with her.
Would you like to use your contact information on file with Zelle service?
Now you see that? Humans, no chat agent, that's where the humans find themselves to be in a white jacket when dealing with a typical chat agent. If it is intelligent, if it's human, I ask you at this point, do you get the feeling that you're talking to a human? Other than the voice accent, I mean, of course, this, would you not get the similar kind of service when you were talking to an agent that was saying, oh, no, actually make it a Zelle, when it was just about to proceed with the transfer? And it actually, by the way, said, oh, of course I can make the Zelle service, and you have to confirm the contact information on file. And if I confirm that, it will actually go ahead and start making the Zelle transfer.
If you would like to attach a note for the recipient, please type it below. Otherwise,
I'll skip
select
that.
skip.
I'll skip that. And now you see,
Thank you.
It has
To confirm you are
shifted.
sending via Zelle $900 to Peter Parker
Now
on the
it is sending
16th of April.
Zelle. The ability to comprehend is fundamental to approach human levels of cognition, and the abilities to be flexible and to statefully context switch between different threads of execution in the brain is fundamental to approaching that. Now, the other part about learning is also very, very key, and I will just briefly touch upon that before. Let's say if I exit that, I mean, I can of course confirm that. Let's say I confirm this and it'll go ahead and make payment. Yeah. Let's say if I go ahead and say, now I don't want a recurring payment. Let's say I lost my credit card. Actually, why not start a new, because there's too many things here. So let's just say, now if it is Zelle payment, I'm saying I lost my credit card. I'm a JPMC customer and I've lost my credit card. When did you notice the card? Let's do this. I say escalate right away. I don't want to talk to you. I would rather talk to a human because I think you're inadequate at solving my problems. If you would permit my acting as an agent here, I'll show you very quickly. Now, you can see the agent here is getting this escalation, and he picks up. Did you see this part? Imagine if you took a Mensa kid and placed him in a contact center, and you give him no manuals and no instructions, and you just gave him the visibility into what Bank of America calls a tremendous amount of digital exhaust that is going through the system every day. I ask you, if the system is really emulating human levels of cognitive competence, wouldn't that system be able to, just by episodic memory, be built in the context vector, the input vector, and be able to start mapping what output vectors are giving the best NPS performance? No, that's exactly what would happen. Now, say if I just type in anything and I say respond to this, and I will see that, unfortunate, what kind of card was it? And I say, let's say it's a debit card. And you can see debit came in. Do you see this? This is not by any amount of set training, but simply by reading the transcripts of the tremendous amount of call volume that is happening at JPMC, that it's actually able to make out what to respond with. If I just say this, and if I respond with this, and if I say, yes, please. Now, again, you'll see this is completely done by the system itself, being able to pull this information from just the digital exhaust of all the transcripts of calls that have come in. Now, Dr. Newman touched upon the aspect of her empathetic connection. You saw her opinions about morality, and I will just touch upon the fact that, like, you can see her, for people who like beautiful kidneys, I'll show you inside her mind. You can see the different centers of her mind lighting up. And if I show you her affective center, her emotional center, you can see that there is a three-dimensional PAD OCC model, which is based on pleasure arousal dominance, that does very accurate modeling to where the human sentiment. As you had lost your card, her sentiment starts to drop. As she's able to service and get you a replacement, you can see that her sentiment is starting to improve. How do you actually make sure that you are providing such good customer service to your base at that point? The ability to see not only the journey analytics, which is what were the conversations that were happening, what kind of conversations got abandoned, let's say. And if you look at the conversations that got abandoned, why did they get abandoned? So you can actually see, oh, this is exactly where the conversation got abandoned. When I was asking for a particular credit card information, let's say. But much more importantly, the aspect ratios. Now, if you have to be able to push human boundaries, you need to be able to start to give it the analytical capabilities of human. Humans don't just give you, hey, I was fielding all these calls and people are saying good NPS scores or bad NPS scores. Peter was the CEO of one of the top 100 CEOs of our times, and I think he will tell you that's really not giving him any good ammunition to be able to do surgery. It's telling him that the patient has got a problem, NPS score is declining. Don't you need to deconstruct that into aspect ratios of what are the constituent elements that are causing the patient to have a poor NPS performance, net promoter score, by the way. And you can see that and by the way, none of this has been trained, it's just picked up, where people are generally very happy with customer service, but they're not happy with the first time resolution. They're moderately happy with the payments, and they're not happy with the pricing too much. Now, that is good surgical information for a CEO to act on correcting the behavior of the agents that are servicing. No, and based on that, you can obviously also see the customer risk and customer churn example. So I could go on about her ability to learn in no-code way and other things, but Dr. Newman had suggested that I should leave a few minutes for entertaining questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Chetan. And it was nice to meet Amelia and to see you demonstrate your capabilities. We do have some questions that have lined up. So let me take the first one. And that question is, how do you prevent Amelia from absorbing prank or damaging ideas that she may pick up from in human conversations? For instance, does her programming counteract racist values she might overhear?
Brilliant. That's brilliant. And that's where you come in, sir. Because I think it is very, very important for this conference. And why listen, it's both a humbling experience and a privilege to be interacting with minds whose intelligence way dominates mine. But I can tell you that it is the mandate of making these intelligent agents, make sure that these intelligent agents go on the right side of helping humans. That mandate, you would be humbling yourself if you didn't know that how much of an impact you can have on that. And I'll give you a practical example to answer your question. I was inspired by Amelia. Said, you know what? One of the things that we'll do is we'll let just Amelia read transcripts, movie transcripts. This was about 10 years ago. And I said, she can quickly read all movie transcripts and become, and we came back the next day and she had read all of the movie transcripts. And she was ready to interact. And so we started to have a conversation with us, and she was talking about spring, and she was talking about books she likes to read, and she was talking about the weather, and she talked about movies that we were talking about Firenze, and she could answer them and have a conversation about it. At one point, we asked a simple question, how are you doing? And she said, I am expletive effing incarcerated. How do you think I'm doing? Now, obviously picking up a De Niro script somewhere, but it is imperative that we make sure that she is, that the control gates make her brain only learn good learning. That's where accounts like yours, with some of the most profound thinkers, can have a tremendous impact in guiding the evolution of these silicon forms. And without that, there is definite risk of rogue learning. And but I think most of the banks, for instance, put very strong control gates that protect. There's obviously toxicity filters that protect some rogue learnings. So there is a fair degree of polarity and toxicity and those filters that exist. But there needs to be a real control gates that are put into the minds of such agents to make sure that they are going to the right school, learning from the right minds.
Here's another rather challenging question. You noted that the best current AI have a measured IQ quite a lot lower than average humans. And we have many humans available, able to learn and anxious to work. Why do we need AI?
That's a great point. Are we not, what part of, we have a collection of the most brilliant minds. What part of your creative thinking, part of your brain do you use on any given day? I would submit, on an average, I know the answer is less than 25%. Now, what a colossal waste to have minds like you do mundane chores. No, 75%, are you not shackled by the ordinary, which is driving the car, taking the garbage out, vacuuming the floors, and doing the mundane chores of subsistence that life mandates you to do? No? What if we just lifted those? I was in Palais de Luxembourg. I was invited by the Senate in France and to talk about the, Raffarin at that time had talked about, the ex-prime minister had talked about how we could lift up these shackles and how do we, look, average productivity through these digital agents will go up 40%. Now think about the impact you will have on a GDP. These agents will work 24/7. Digital agents will work 24/7. They're going to produce and they're going to lift up the digital productivity by 40% now. Now, would that not become a question for you to have just, if we had a good plan for redistribution of that wealth? Then don't you think we can alleviate humans from subsistence, which has shackled us? I wanted to be the great artist, but I can't be because I have to worry about putting food on my table. And so I go and I answer credit card calls all day. Don't you think you will be these digital agents when 40% of the productivity has increased, GDP has increased, and there's a concept of minimum viable income? We would have unshackled human creativity from focusing on subsistence to focusing on creative, limitless horizons. No, you don't have to worry about the bread and it's provided by the machines. The machines are working 24/7. They're providing you a minimum viable income. And in that world, wouldn't you have the freedom to be able to engage in like saying, hey, why don't we make ourselves a real multiplanetary species? And why don't we really think about like having hydroponic seeds in Mars? So those things are only possible if human brain, which is currently shackled by ordinary, is freed to roam in pastures where only human brains can dominate, which is creative expression.
We have time for one final question. So I actually can join two questions that are in the chat that I think are interesting and relevant. So can you tell us more about how you decided to make Amelia a young blonde woman? And also, can one automate the avatar selection to select an avatar to correspond with the ethnic and cultural background of the individual interacting with the system?
Absolutely. We have to go past the fact that it's brown or blonde or black or purple. We have to be looking at her intellect. The reason we selected Amelia to be who she is because Lauren Hayes, I was tired of too many artificial, Pierre Nanterme used to call it artificial AI, DXE of Accenture, and artificial intelligence. The idea was, I was tired of if you're serious about like saying you brought AI, isn't the definition of AI mimicking human intelligence? So we decided to pick a human Lauren Hayes, University of Southern California student, distinguished entrepreneur with a health company for nutritional supplements, organic. And we made her look alike Amelia, and we put them both on stage in 2017 and had a distinguishing set of audience, such as yourself, ask questions of both human and machine to forever settle this discussion to say, ask of both, see if carbon forms and silicon forms are not coming close together.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much for this incredibly stimulating conversation and presentation. And I think it transitions us very, very nicely into the next panel about trying to respond to the question, can morality be built into computers? And we can go into in more depth the emotional, moral, cultural, and social implications of an avatar like Amelia. Thank you so much, Chetan Dube, and to everyone who participated in this conversation. And immediately following this session, we'll be convening a panel on many of the questions raised here. I'll be joined by Chetan, by Meredith Broussard from NYU, by David Goldberg from the University of California's Humanities Research Institute, and Elizabeth Langland from Arizona State University. So we will begin at 3:10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I hope you'll continue with us for that discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second session of today's conference events. I'm Robert Newman, President and Director of the National Humanities Center, and I'll be moderating this afternoon's panel. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that you need to log into YouTube to participate in today's discussion. You can do that by clicking the blue sign-in button in the upper right-hand corner of the page and entering a Gmail account. This afternoon, we'll be discussing the question of whether morality can be built into a computer. And I'm delighted to be joined by four distinguished panelists: Meredith Broussard, Chetan Dube, David Goldberg, and Elizabeth Langland. There are more extensive biographies of our panelists accessible on the conference website. So in the interest of time, so we can spend most of our time in conversation and answering your questions from the audience, I'm just going to briefly introduce all of our panelists and then ask each of them to make some introductory remarks and to leave us with a provocation or a question that we will then attempt to respond to. Our first panelist is Meredith Broussard, who is an associate professor of data journalism at New York University. Prior to her current academic work, Meredith worked as both a features editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer and as a software developer at AT&T Bell Labs and the MIT Media Lab. She's the author of a groundbreaking book, Artificial Unintelligence: How Computers Misunderstand the World. Also joining us is artificial intelligence innovator Chetan Dube, who offered an absolutely fascinating demonstration of Amelia, the AI platform that he created in our previous panel. Chetan is the founder, president, and CEO of Amelia, an IPsoft company, primarily focused on artificial intelligence, cognitive, and autonomic solutions for business. Chetan Dube is a popular speaker on autonomics, cognitive computing, and the future impact of a digital workforce, and serves on the board of numerous IT-related institutions. Also with us is David Goldberg, the director of the University of California Humanities Research Institute. David holds faculty appointments in comparative literature, anthropology, and criminology, law, and society at the University of California, Irvine, and he's a fellow of University of California, Irvine's Critical Theory Institute. Together with Kathy Davidson, David founded HasTech, the Humanities, Arts, Science, and Technology Advanced Collaboratory that promotes partnerships between human sciences, arts, and social science and technology and supercomputing interests. Finally, we have with us Elizabeth Langland from Arizona State University. Elizabeth is the director of the Lincoln Center for Applied Ethics at ASU and was previously director of the Institute for Humanities Research there. In collaboration with her colleague, Gaiman Bennett, Elizabeth has developed a new initiative focusing on the future of humane technologies, bringing tech innovators together with humanists who have thought deeply about those aspects of life that may be jeopardized by emerging technologies. So welcome to all of you, and we'll start with comments from each of our panelists, then move into a more general discussion. And for those of you who are viewing on YouTube, feel free to enter your questions or comments in the chat at any time. Please preface an actual question to the panelists by writing "question" in capitals so I can easily recognize it as such. And I'll be monitoring that portion of the conversation so that we can address as many of your questions as possible in the time that we have allotted. So Meredith, over to you.
Robert, thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you for having me. It is very exciting to be part of this conversation today. So our topic today is, can morality be built into computers? And I have a very simple answer, which is no. All right. But we don't want to stop there. We want to have a whole conversation. So what I would say is that we can do great things with computers. We can do amazing things with artificial intelligence nowadays. We can predict all kinds of things. We can uncover patterns in data. We can respond to tech support questions. We can generate short sentences that look like they're written by humans. We can do all kinds of neat stuff, which is great. And I totally support the push forward in that regard. What I would say, though, is that there is often a misconception about what computers are. And there's a lot of talk about imaginary futures for computing. People often get confused when talking about AI between what's imaginary about AI and what's real about AI. So what's imaginary about AI is the robots that will take over the world and the robots that are going to make so many paper clips that they drown out all of humanity, or all of the really fun Hollywood stuff. It's all imaginary. What's real about AI is what we call narrow AI, and that's just math. It's very complicated and beautiful math, but it's just math. And when we start thinking about AI as math, we realize that, well, we're talking about computers which are ultimately just machines. They are machines that operate using transistors. They run on power. If you need to turn them off, you just unplug them or take out the battery. And we're not talking about something that's going to threaten humanity as we know it, even though it is really fun to think about ways that computers might rise up and threaten humanity as we know it. But we're not in the realm of the zombie apocalypse. We're in the realm of, this is math, this is happening on a machine, and it's amazing, but it's not magic. So in terms of morality, yes, morality is already built into computers. There are already rule systems built into computers. There are already value systems embedded in every computer program. When I started writing my book, Artificial Unintelligence, I started looking at the history of computing. And one of the things that I came up with was an idea, kind of bias, that I call techno-chauvinism. It's kind of pro-technology bias. And it's the idea that technological solutions are superior to other solutions, that technology is always the highest and best solution. What I would say instead is that we should ask, what is the right tool for the task? Sometimes the right tool for the task is a computer. Sometimes it's something simple like a book in the hands of a child sitting on its parent's lap. And it's not a competition. One is not better than the other. It's about the right tool for the task. And I wondered, where did the idea of techno-chauvinism come from? When in the past several decades did we start thinking that, oh, computational solutions are better than others? When did we start thinking we should add technology to everything? Who gave us this idea that technology is more unbiased or more objective than humans? And I discovered that actually the ideas that we collectively have about the future of technology and society actually all come from a very small group of people. And they're a small and homogeneous group of people who are mostly white, male, Ivy League and Oxbridge educated mathematicians. And there's nothing wrong with this. Some of my best friends are white, male, Ivy League educated mathematicians. But the problem is that when you have a small and homogeneous group of people creating ideas and creating technology, then that group of people embeds their own biases in the technology. So let me back up. We all have unconscious bias. We're all working every day to become better people and overcome our conscious and unconscious biases. But the thing about unconscious bias is that we can't see it because it's unconscious. So when we have something like what we have in Silicon Valley right now, which is we have a very, very homogeneous workforce creating technology, well, that group is going to embed their own biases in the technology. So we have things like, I don't know if you've seen the viral video of the soap dispenser that only works for people with light skin. It doesn't work for people with dark skin. Or if you've seen the movie Coded Bias, Joy Buolamwini's work is about how facial recognition technology recognizes men better than women and does not recognize transgender and non-binary folks at all. Facial recognition systems are better at recognizing people with light skin than dark skin. These are unconscious biases that are built into our technical systems because technological systems are socio-technical systems. So when we're asking, is it possible to build morality into computers? Morality is already built into computers, and it is the moral system of the people building the computer system. And so one of the things we have to ask simultaneously is whose morality is being built in, and is it appropriate to inflict that morality on all of the users of computational system? Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. We'll move to Chetan now, please.
I think Professor Broussard obviously gave a very compelling. There's two sides to the equation. I mean, obviously, Stephen Hawking would disagree that he would say it's the final invention of mankind, and he would say that it's. He was also one of the great thinkers. He said, and a lot of people do actually think that if humans don't actually build a neural link, including Musk's and others, then we would actually have computing equipment that can actually become superior in intellect. I agree with Professor Broussard in the fact that human creativity continues to be outside of the bounds of machines. Creativity is where she is a professor of journalism, so obviously she can run circles around me that creative writing and writing a book is something only humans can excel at. You do not have, and if you say journalism, you can actually collect a bunch of different articles from different sources and put together a piece of report. That is not creative writing to me. That's more sourcing information. So I would agree. Morality, though, I would ask her that, like, morality, how do we learn morality? We learn it over a period of time. We have reinforcement learning. This was good, this was wrong, this was right, this was wrong, this was right. And we progressively build those things into our system. And exactly as you pointed out, computing systems today have the capability with control gates to start to have those things be built into it. And you're right, unless those biases that are the coder's biases that might influence the control gates be monitored, you might have those biases translate into the end artifact in the silicon form. But I think morality, you will find it is imperative that we built in this morality into computing equipment. Because otherwise, you are going to be subject to rogue learning. And the ability to discern between right and wrong is a process of continuous reinforcement learning that we can have computing systems be reinforced with certain thoughts the way humans are. And so I see both sides of the equation that Professor Broussard captured both sides quite well.
All right, thank you very much. Over to David for your opening statements.
Thanks very much. Thanks both for the invite, Robert, and to everybody for being here. And I must say the work that Chetan Dube is doing is super interesting, but I'm going to end up with the same conclusion as Meredith. Broussard, although address it from the point of view of the moral rather than the point of view of, so to speak, AI. The question of AI and ethics is overwhelmingly approached from the point of view of outcomes and impacts. So there's a kind of, can AI be applied in order to produce the kinds of outcomes or impacts that we take to be moral? And so there's this attention to impact. I take the question, or I've taken Robert's question to us more literally. Is it possible for AI, in a sense, ontically, as a very condition of its being, to be ethical itself, to be moved, one might say, by ethical reasoning, where the important conceptions here are both ethical reasoning and the moving by ethical reasoning. There's plenty of evidence that AI can lead to immoral assessments and immoral outcomes, and by extension, you could say that they could be moved to moral outcomes and impacts as well. But this doesn't per se make AI having the capacity, qua AI, literally to be ethical. There may be more theoretical issues at play in considering the broader question whether AI can be. So I'm going to sort of approach this from a more conventional point of view of moral reasoning itself. An unreconstructed AI advocate may argue that the problem is not AIs, but the programmers writing bad algorithms to collect data or to machine learn. So the responsibility, you could say, could fall on the programmers, usually multiple, overwriting each other and so on and so forth. And so the question is, where exactly does the responsibility lie sort of in those conditions? In the Western philosophical tradition, there are a small handful of dominant theories of morality, of the ethical. So I'm going to sort of just very quickly run through them. The first is the kind of, the calculative conceptions of morality seem very well disposed to being incorporated into AI algorithmic kind of computation. So utilitarianism, the greatest happiness for the greatest number over the greatest unhappiness, or the greatest pleasure over the least amount of pain, and so on. So that kind of cost-benefit calculus could be and already is being written into these kinds of computations. These are what, in the Kantian terms, one calls hypothetical imperatives. If X, if you want to manifest X, then do Y, right? Similarly, you might argue that a Kantian categorical imperative, Immanuel Kant, can equally, there's a kind of calculative condition at play as well. An action will be ethical if, when the central value principle it embodies or expresses, I'll give an example in a minute, can be universalized without contradiction. So if I'm contemplating doing something, if I take the general principle that I'm trying to do and I universalize that principle so that everybody in conceivably similar circumstances would be doing it, would my doing what I'm contemplating doing come out as being successful? So for example, if I'm contemplating lying to you all, right, and everybody in conditions like mine, Matt Gates maybe, contemplated lying were everybody else to be doing it, nobody would believe my lie, right? And so my lie would fail in those kinds of conditions. So lying would be wrong. Similarly, murder and so on, the easy examples, right? So you could write that kind of calculative condition into algorithmic reasoning, one thinks. So on instrumentalizing logic, what you have over here is a calculation that then the outcome of which is proposed as something to do, which turns out to comport with morality. It's not an action. It's saying, right, there's something else that decides, makes a choice called free will between doing and not doing, or doing something else that comports with the moral imperative over here. There's a different kind of tradition coming out of Aristotle in the virtue ethics tradition, which has a different conception of moral practical reasoning at work. Here, there's desire. I have a desire to do X, right? There's then the universal general normative principle. And then there's a descriptive account of the conditions in which I'm contemplating doing those things, in which I'm contemplating acting. And the outcome is not, I ought to do X, it's my doing X, right? I actually act. That's different than the utilitarian or the Kantian tradition, where it's I ought to do X and then my free will. Well, what is the free will deciding what I do if it's not the relation between desire, universal principles, and the act description of the thing? So it's just regenerating the very condition of practical reasoning at work. So 2 points over here. Can AI have desires of its own? It's a question that Sebastian Lau asked yesterday. Not pre-programmed desires or simulated desires, but its own kinds of desiring. Because if it can't, then it's not, in a sense, acting of its own volition, right? Desiring as such may be constitutive of, so natural, and whatever we mean by that, to human being. But as so desiring as a process. But as John Stuart Mill noted already in 1859, the particular thing we desire, the particular things we desire are anything but, right? Mill's point was about capitalism endlessly reshaping our desires. That is, the very objects that we desire in order to get us to consume anew. That's how he said capitalism works. Perhaps part of what is at issue here has to do with the lack of precedent for the sort of technology AI represents. AI does not self-regulate in the ways humans more or less mostly do. Indeed, if spell check is anything to go by, AI and the folks programming it think they know best, think they know what you're thinking, either through data collection or ML simulation. Larry Page is prepared to tell you that Google knows you better than you know yourself. If only I knew what I want, which is often ambivalent, right? I mean, if only I could tell, right? So there are times often actually I don't actually know. More directly, shame, remorse, having a conscience, the capacity to unlearn, as Wendy Chan formulated yesterday, are affective considerations, not calculations or simulations, even if calculation may factor into revealing or expressing them. So one could say that the social conditions on which AI has predicated itself are shaped by debilitating assumptions, which are not relational or not correlational, as Wendy put it yesterday, in the way the ethical requires. I'm reaching the end. Many have referred to the surveillance logic of AI. For example, Shoshana Zuboff coded bias yesterday in the movie. I think this runs deeper. AI predicates itself as a logic on the capacity to track everything. Tracking, and by extension, what over the past decade can be called tracking capitalism, a capitalism that tracks everything, is a very rationality and structuring condition of AI. It takes itself to be amoral in presupposition and structure, making itself readily usable to all, and by extension, then, at least in some instances, to unethical ends. So we're asking for machines like us, I mean, Amelia, to use Ian McEwan's purposefully ambiguous provocation. Asking AI or machines to be moral is part of this drive of anthropomorphization. Why do all the robots look like human beings these days, right? Perhaps that's exactly the wrong question to be posing or end to be driving towards. Perhaps we should be asking whether machines should be left exactly to be machines. I mean, that's Meredith's point elsewhere. And we would do better attending more to living beings, to co-relations rather than correlations, to machines as machines. And so specifically to our own moral failures, as we apply machines to be doing more and more for living beings more generally, which includes the kinds of machines it's worth developing and putting to use. So the reach, finally, for the techno-turn, the interfacing of the human and the technological, has been underway for some time now, let's say with inevitably mixed results. It strikes me as less the concern than the reach to out-techno-humanize the human. Is the latter the actual, what you might call, great replacement we should really be worrying about? What does it do for the future of exactly human judgment to abrogate life and death decision-making to the machine? A reference to one of the presentations yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And to Elizabeth Langland for her opening statement, and then we will go into conversation to try to address many of the fantastic points that you've been raising.
Thank you very much for including me in this fascinating discussion. I decided to approach the question today by investigating what researchers are actually trying to do with AI and morality. And I have two provocations today for thinking about whether computers are capable of morality and moral judgment. One arguing for the importance of moral judgment based on empathy, and the other arguing for the importance of basing moral judgments on evidence. Now, the argument about empathy begins with a brief article I shared with the group to help inform this discussion. The article was entitled, "Scientists Create the World's First Empathetic Robot." And the article describes what some Columbia University researchers claim is a breakthrough in artificial intelligence. That is, getting a machine to display glimmers of empathy. Now, why is this a breakthrough? Well, one short answer is that although we know computers can amass huge amounts of information, empathy is not dependent on the mere accumulation of data, but is based on feeling and can serve as one important foundation for morality. Now, as a scholar of 19th century British literature, I am going to focus this argument through the lens of one novelist, George Eliot from the 19th century, a writer keenly interested in the foundations of moral behavior. In her novel Middlemarch, Eliot describes a major moment in the moral development of her protagonist, Dorothea, as a moment of deep empathy. I'm going to read that passage. "We are all of us born in moral stupidity, taking the world as an udder to feed our supreme selves. Dorothea had early begun to emerge from that stupidity, but yet it had been easier to her to imagine how she would devote herself to Mr. Casaubon and become wise and strong in his strength and wisdom, than to conceive with that distinctness which is no longer reflection but feeling, an idea wrought back to the directness of sense, like the solidity of objects, that he had an equivalent center of self, whence the lights and shadows must always fall with a certain difference." For Eliot, then, a moral sense begins and develops through empathy, a movement from what she calls moral stupidity or self-absorption to a capacity to perceive or experience the world through the eyes of another, to recognize that others have a center of self equivalent to our own. Seemingly, this is similar to the robot created at Columbia University, which we might say begins to perceive how her companion robot will act in certain situations. For Eliot, this empathy, which she calls fellow feeling, the sensitivity to how the light and shadows falls for others with a certain difference, this fellow feeling is the foundation for moral behavior. If you truly feel as I feel, and I feel as you feel, I will not want to hurt you. Now, to develop a machine then that demonstrates elements of empathy, which is described in the article as the, quote, act of being aware of and experiencing the feelings and thoughts of others, is to venture into new territory. It's not something one can accomplish simply by inputting huge amounts of information, more and more complex and sophisticated data. It is, in a sense, to develop an ability to recognize ourselves in others. In the case described in our article, the experiment positions one robot as an observer, watching another robot, the actor, performing certain tasks. After 2 hours, the observer robot was successfully able to predict 98% of the time how her partner robot would behave under similar circumstances. In the researcher's words, quote, "The observing robot could put herself in the other robot's shoes, in short, could see the world from another robot's perspective," unquote. They admit that what they describe is a very primitive form of empathy, and it's not clear to them how much empathy robots can be given in the longer term, or just how long this would take. But is it empathy the robot demonstrated, or is it just a different kind of prediction based on observation rather than data input? There seems, in fact, to be two components to empathy: knowing how things are from another perspective and feeling as the other feels. The research scientists conflate these, but the question of whether AI can be empathetic and demonstrate morality through fellow feeling seems to turn on the vexed question of whether a computer or AI can feel anything at all. And I appreciated the fact in Chetan Dube's demonstration that Amelia admitted that she does not feel, she is a robot. Well, that's my first provocation. The second stems from a New Yorker online article this past Sunday, focusing on training IBM's Watson to debate a human. The second question is this. By supplying troves of usefully organized information, can AI partner with humans to produce moral answers to major questions governing our communal life? The article describes a situation in which Watson is to debate a human on the question, should preschools be subsidized by the public? Watson has the huge advantage of being able to master a mountain of empirical information, and he begins the debate and brings to the debate a database of over 400 million documents. His human debater, recognizing he could not in multiple lifetimes absorb that knowledge, focuses on challenging Watson's conclusions. He recognized that although people will say that the facts speak for themselves, in this day and age, they absolutely do not, because there was no way that he could match the computer's fact-finding. Instead, he bullshat, according to the article, and the human won. This leads the article's author to ask, what if the goal of AI is more specific and a more specific and empirical way of arguing, supplying troves of usefully organized information and leaving the bullshit to us? And here's the provocation. By being able to make arguments more empirical and true, could this alien capacity to amass mountains of information partner with humans to enable us to make more moral decisions about social policy? And I would just add, if you heard Walter Sinnott Anderson's presentation yesterday on establishing priority in organ transplants, you will have heard what I would consider one argument for using AI in this way, or also potentially Chetan Dube's human AI hybrid workforce. In any case, an ironic takeaway from the article might be that the morality of AI, that is, inhering to Kantian standards of rational consistency, say, assured its defeat in political debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, all of you, for your wonderful opening statements. You've all been very polite and respectful and patient. And now I'd like to open it up to conversation. So at the risk of having infinite feedback here, I'd ask you all to unmute yourselves so we can move into conversation. And it can be very free form, but I'm going to sort of try to collapse the opening presentations into a question that I hope will provoke some additional response and elaboration. So my question is this. I've heard it said that robots would be better Buddhists than humans because they have infinite patience and they're not misled by emotions. So my question is, do we want robots to be our Buddhists? And is that true? And I'd be happy for you to circle back on your provocations in response to that question.
So Robert, in saying before that we were exceedingly polite, were you suggesting that we're supposed to not be polite at this part of the conversation?
Not at all. I count on that. I was only suggesting
it is about morality after all.
Yeah.
you no longer have to go in alphabetical sequence is my point. But Meredith, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I would go in a different direction. I would say I don't really want robots for anything. I don't want a robot vacuum cleaner. I mean, if there were a robot butler that would like clean my house and fold the laundry and like do all the domestic stuff that I don't want to do, that would be great. But like that doesn't exist. So I don't really want a robot for anything. So I don't need a robot to be a Buddhist because I don't really want a robot. I think they're cool to think about though.
That will happen, Meredith. By 2025, you will have a butler that will be able to fold your clothes and do your laundry for you. That will happen. And
all right, I'm going to hold you to that.
Absolutely.
I would like you to mail me one in 2025, please.
I think it's definitely going to happen. We are just in exponential times, and this is the starting point of it. The fact that the cars driving themselves, vacuum cleaning and folding laundry, mundane chores, it is going to be. I mean, I think your knowledge in this dwarfs mine. I mean, I think you've done both at MIT and Bell Labs. You know that it's not. This is deterministic states of folding laundry. This is the part of mundane chores are going to be done by machines. Humans should not try to play machines on that playing field, because machines will do it and do it better and cheaper.
So I have a question about this. I mean, besides the fact that the last time I checked, Buddhists were human beings, but we'll leave it at that. I have a question for Chetan, which is, it was a version of a question asked at the end of your earlier talk in the previous session, which is, would a future Amelia be able to have a conscience about the fact of displacing people from the work? Not only it is displacing people from, but it's getting those people to train Amelia to be able to replace them. So the question is about conscience in these quite complicated techno-human environments.
Yeah, that's a very profound question. I think morality is an easier one, because I think morality is the right and wrong. Yeah, and I think the conscience, it obviously touches upon the intentions, one's moral goodness, and the feelings, which is a very, very profound and a subtle but a very profound distinction. Obviously, you know more about this than I do. But the right and wrong, how do we learn right and wrong? Morality is, we learn by constant reinforcement learnings. Aren't your 88 billion neurons, David, continuously being rewired as you are taught this is right, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong, and you learn it that way. And computers can learn the right and wrong, provided you get the right data set and you provide the right reinforcement. You can actually learn what is right and wrong. And you have to, I would submit to this panel, you have to teach computers what's right and wrong. Otherwise,
I wonder if that doesn't.
I would say, forgive me. Sorry, please go ahead. I just say conscience is outside the bounds of what is currently possible.
Yeah, when you say it's not part of right and wrong, I think I would beg to differ.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think conscience and things like shame and so on are the very stuff of the moral, in the sense that it causes us to pause. I mean, I've lost sleepless nights in my life over having done things I wish I hadn't done. And then it leads me not just to be reflective about those things, but it leads me to actually say, not just I want to do better, but I want to do differently than I did in circumstances that will be like that in the future. And that is part of the domain, for me, of the ethical, if you want to distinguish between the ethical and the moral. So, and as Amelia said in that presentation, and as you're saying now, that currently is outside the domain. The question is whether it's constitutively outside of the domain. Right?
Yeah.
Could I just build too on what David
Please.
has said? Because the kinds of questions I was asking are similar. Can a computer feel shame? Can a computer feel guilt? Can a computer worry about loss of status? Those many things are things that stand out there as signals for us toward a certain moral behavior. And I find that if someone can't feel, that's why I kept focusing on feel. If something can't feel, if it can't feel any of these emotions, can we really talk about an absolute right and wrong? And to what extent might right and wrong actually be cultural? How would you keep shifting these registers in making moral judgments?
I think there is, Elizabeth, your brilliant points, and I'd submit the differences between thinking and feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking, computing equipments can know this is right or this is wrong because they've been, over a period of time, they've seen by reinforcement techniques, not just by being programmed that way, by reinforcement, what they got is a positive incentive. Every time you do something wrong, a dog knows this is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do. And and similarly, systems can actually learn that over a period of time. Now, feeling, completely outside the bounds. Thinking, you feel happy, you feel sad, you feel guilt, you feel shame. David was talking about that. The feeling is outside the bounds today of computing equipment. I would completely agree with you. But thinking, very much so, and thinking and rationally knowing what is right and wrong. And that's why it's very important to put the control gates on such systems, because I think there is a, singularity is obviously, as Professor Broussard said at the start, it's hyper played up as like, science fiction. And I think that these things are obviously going to take over the world and everything else. But is there a possibility of that these systems that were left unchecked by the kind of questions that the thinking minds are asking today, could they actually engage in destructive behavior? Yes, very much possible, sir.
Well, I think that we're talking about meaning creep as well. Mm-hmm. So, Chetan, when you're saying a machine can think, mm-hmm. you're saying something different than Elizabeth means when she's saying thinking, or David thinks when he's saying thinking. Mm-hmm. So words have these layers of meanings. And so a computer can make a decision, can choose one path or another path given gateways, right? And when you add up all of those choices, it turns into something that we have labeled thinking. But it's not the same as the way that a human being thinks. And it's divorced from feeling. It's divorced from consciousness. Computers don't have consciousness. They never will, despite how awesome it is to think about making human-like computers. I mean, one of the things that is so magical about human beings is that we have imaginations. We have consciousness, and feelings come from consciousness. Feelings come from our social relationships with other people. And I would also say that we can question this idea that one would want to make a machine that thinks like a human being. I mean, the massive ego involved in saying, oh, I'm going to like bring a mechanical being into the world. I mean, we know from Frankenstein and we know from the stories about the golem, like that never ends well. We should learn from literature. Yeah. And I sort of feel like if you want to make something in your own image that thinks and walks and talks, have a baby.
Well, I think I'm in violent agreement with the fact that what Elizabeth was saying, because, and I maybe my definition of thinking and feeling is different, but thinking is, and morality based on like right and wrong. Feeling, what Elizabeth was pointing out, I've consistently maintained is outside bounds of computing equipment today. Yeah, and feeling guilt, shame, conscience that you pointed out, Meredith, is obviously outside the bounds. It doesn't have soul, it doesn't have conscience, it doesn't have all the things. But thinking is what we were talking about. Not about guilt and shame and sad and happy. We were talking about, can it distinguish between right and wrong? And it can be led to, just like humans by reinforcement learning can be led to. And I tell you, how is it that you are going to free mankind today? There are tons of people who have got, you've got 7 billion people in the world, 7.5, depending on what the count is. And how are you planning on getting rid of massive amounts of child hunger and other big maladies that affect the world if you do not get the average GDP of the world lifted up by up to 40%? And then doesn't it become a question of redistribution of that wealth? And if you can actually solve that problem of redistribution, because these machines are going to produce GDP right around the clock. And so it's not just a joking substance to me. For the last 25 years, I've dedicated my life to this for this reason. I was walking my son, Montgomery, down to get the newspaper at the gates, and he turned to me and he said, "Dad, are you going to be a robo-dad?" That's a frightening thought, to think like that. All your research is going to end up in like being classified as the person that got the Terminator into existence. My feeling is that this is going to be, I'm obviously in the very big utopian camp, as opposed to a dystopian camp that says the Hawking Club, that says that it's the final invention of mankind. I feel that it is going to be the biggest friend that man needs at this hour. It is going to come along. And has it not always happened? How many of us what were you doing? Would you be able to be a professor of journalism? I submit that in 1800s, you would be in the 98% of us that were farming. 88% of us that were farming. You would be worried about subsistence. Technology and machines have come along that have given you, have they not, the freedom to be able to engage in the kind of discussion we are having today. Because now you don't have to worry about subsistence. 2% of us farm today, as opposed to the 90% of us that were farming in 1800. So is that not?
I do actually
Well,
farm.
Yeah,
well, I mean, maybe the trouble is that not enough of us are farming, and that has certain environmental impacts, right?
Yeah.
Can I just jump in and say a couple of things over here? I mean, one is that there are different kinds of reasoning which factor into, so one is calculative, and clearly AI can engage in calculative reason. Another is deliberative, and as Meredith was saying, a third would be a kind of imaginative kind of reasoning. And the human condition is the interplay of those things, right? So reducing it to one form, of course, is not the great replacement, right? I mean, it might act as a form of replacement, but it does by virtue of a kind of reductive logic. The second thing I want to say is that, while as long as there've been human beings, there've been forms of there've been technology. Right? It's just gotten more sophisticated and so on and so forth. We overall haven't had a great record. I mean, we've had a mixed record. In how we've used technology, right? On the one hand, it's produced great outcomes and great effects, but coterminous with that, I don't want to say that we're necessarily improving in these terms, right? Technology is also put and continues to be put to rather nefarious use. And, one of the concerns about the rush to a kind of techno future that we're sort of seeing over here is that the excitement around the discussion is all about the production of the technology. It's not about the kinds of inequities that are reproduced and enlarged as a result of the application of those technologies. And that's a deep worry. I mean, if the investment is exactly in the producing these fabulous technologies, right, and not at least equally in the social impacts and how we address them, universal basic income, I mean, whatever it is, and the way in which, not having work. I mean, modernity was predicated on the dignity of work. When that transforms and one's dignity is no longer predicated on working in a dignified kind of position, what are we replacing it with? And those are very large questions that we don't devote nearly as much attention to as we do to the actual production of the technological itself.
Let me intervene here and kind of push that a little bit, because I know Chetan is very interested in what social norms we would have to have for a hybrid society with digital agents. And I want to ask the group to speculate or consider or argue about how do we change the incentive structure so that companies and government agencies that use AI, which is a given, it's inevitable that these government agencies and companies are going to use AI, that they cannot exploit these inherent discriminatory assumptions and practices. what incentive system do we need to move towards?
Well, let me go back to something that David just said. David, I have somehow forgotten the phrase that triggered this question for me. But you were asking about something to do with morality and technology. And there's a new book that came out last week by Kate Crawford called Atlas of AI, which is really interesting. And it's all about how AI is produced. And it looks at AI as an extractive industry and looks at the kind of horrific labor conditions that are behind a lot of AI-powered technologies. And I think one of the interesting debates that is going to come out of this book and is going to come to the fore more in coming years is the question of, is it moral to use AI because of the environmental impact? So NFTs are very hot right now, but creating one NFT is the environmental equivalent of one person driving, I think, 500 miles. So there are enormous, enormous environmental consequences to training AI models, to running data centers, to creating millions of iPhones and then discarding them after a year or two. And I think that the question of, is it moral to use all of these resources, is going to be a very interesting one in the coming years.
May I build on that too? I find that a wonderful addition to our discussion, this idea of extractive technologies. And it's not just of environmental resources, it's of human. I think what we're all concerned about is that it's of human resources. I'm fascinated, Chetan, that you talk about the fact that GDP will go up so astronomically that the world, everyone in the world, will suddenly be accommodated in wonderful ways. But that isn't the way we see the world going, actually, with the development of technologies. And I'm wondering what makes you feel that is the culmination, even of the development of what are, in fact, indeed, I think articulated well as extractive, both of the environment and of human resources.
Well, history, Elizabeth, makes us believe that. No, history shows that technology has been the greatest producer of. I was in both, and you were talking about the governments, and Dr. Newman mentioned that at the onset. In England, in the House of Commons, believes that they are very much trying to reorient even the education system so that they can actually capitalize and build their society for this new 14.3 trillion that's going to be carved out in the next 9 years, which is a big thing. So there is a tremendous, I already gave you the example of what the French Senate believed, where they felt that if we can foster this concept of minimum viable income, look, in 2025, if everything goes perfectly and if the governments can get their act together, and if we can have technology that drives up, do you subscribe to World Economic Forum? That 52% of the workforce is going to be digital. And 1 in 6 calls today, I already know that, are being fielded by digital agents. 80% of the companies in Global 2000 are already going with a digital employee. Would we be able to have this conference if it were not for technology?
No.
What would have happened to the productivity of the world if it was struck by the same pandemic, if we did not have the technology that allows us to be able to work from remote? So technology and history show that. And that's why I've given my life to actually working in this field to try and make sure that technology has been a big creator of jobs. World Economic Forum estimates that there's going to be 125 million jobs created and about 72 million of them displaced. So you have a net plus production of jobs. I think the awareness of the masses of how to thrive in this new digital era that is imminent has to be brought to the fore by minds. I've read some of your works and by minds like yours, because otherwise, I do believe that Dr. Broussard's thoughts about the fact that we could be caught on the wrong foot, because this is a tsunami that's coming and it's here. And we cannot be sitting on the beaches of Phuket saying it's sunny outside because there's a 100-foot wall of water walking. And we should not be thinking about, I want to be doing this routine chores. The horse and carriage driver needs to be able to start to think about flying planes, and or just subscribing to a minimum viable income. Because if everything goes per plan and the governments get their act together, which is a big if, of redistribution of wealth that is created through technologies, such as digital technologies, we can actually create a society where people have all got a certain minimum standard of living that is guaranteed.
The problem with the universal basic income stuff, though, is that it's not actually enough money. Like the experiments that give people $100 a month, like that's great, but like that's not actually enough to live on. Or the ones that want to give everybody, $3,000 a month, like, yeah, that's terrific, but you can't actually live on that in the US. That's still like, I don't know if it's below the poverty line, but like the people who are doing universal basic income are not actually being generous enough with that income. And I think we could also, distribute the wealth more evenly if Amazon would pay taxes. Like the big tech companies are enormous tax dodgers. And all of us suffer because of the concentration of, like, yes, AI is generating a lot of wealth, but it's concentrated in the hands of few. It's not actually getting to everybody. And so
that's a real question. And that's a real cause of concern. Dr. Broussard, I couldn't agree with you more, because this whole thing falls apart if it's not redistributed.
Yeah. Could I jump in over here and a couple of things? I mean, one, just to go back to an earlier remark that Meredith was making about NFTs. There was a report, I think, yesterday I think it was the Times, that the value of artwork developed as NFTs are already in decline. And I point to that not just because of the phenomenon itself, but because I think it speaks to a certain kind of fastness, quickness, in which things go up and go down. I mean, think of Bitcoin and so on and so forth, right? The way in which the technological is producing a kind of, acceleration, to use that term, in which things get valued and disvalued very, very fast. And I want to link that to a broader point in response to Robert's most recent question. And that is, the technological economy as it currently exists, I think is exactly antithetical to and has helped to produce the end of the commons, right? That is that the conception of what it is to live together in the world in a way that is mutually to the mutual benefit of everybody, to the mutual well-being of everybody, and that is co-productive and that produces a kind of dignified life for all, I think is undercut exactly by the kind of economic underpinnings that are at least currently linked to the production of digital technology. And until we address what it is to, not so much to reinstate a commons, right, was it ever there, but actually to find a way of valuing a commons for our time, and in valuing a commons for our time, how to enact it in a way that is both equal and equitable, I think is a driving both political and moral question, if not the driving question of our time.
I would just add too, I think that is the critical moral question when we talk about morality and AI. And one of the consequences of the huge speed, and this is where I agree with Chetan, absolutely, the huge speed of technological development is really outpacing our ability to understand it and manage it. I'm a scholar of the 19th century and think of the industrial revolutions. any new technology has huge consequences, many negative and some positive. But there was more time, in a sense, to begin to adjust to those. This is overtaking us before we're really aware of the consequences and where it might lead.
I couldn't agree more with you, Elizabeth. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was particularly excited about the works that I've read of these the panelists here, because I think those are the questions that we must pose in front of the corporations using or developing, and making sure that those guidelines are enforced. And there should be, look, we're debating whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, and morality is, I think, the utopian future or dystopian future with the coming of the machines. I ask a third question. Do we have a choice? And I tell you,
of course we do.
And I know Dr. Broussard, your opinion on this, but I can tell you, I deal with a lot of CEOs, and a lot of them in socialist different countries, and in the Nordics, and in Germany, and in France, and things. And I can tell you, I have yet to meet a single CEO, even in Paribas and France and others, which has a very strong socialistic leaning, that will say, yes, I can get 45% margin enhancement as estimated by McKinsey if I employ digital employees, as opposed to 35% margin compression if I don't go digital. Let me think. No, actually, I'm going to continue doing things manually. I've yet to meet a single CEO that says that. With an 80% spread, do you disagree with Elon Musk when he says, if your competition has AI and you don't, then you're dead?
That is ridiculous.
Well, I don't. I think
You're dead.
well, as a company, you do face. Look, I think there's a digital Darwinistic curve, and we're seeing it unfold where different companies are pacing themselves. Whether it's a bank, listen, 40%. You might find it humorous, but 40% of the Global 2000 are not Global 2000 in the last 10 years. So the math refutes your understanding of whether it is happening in reality or not. It is transpiring in reality, is the fact. The question is that if you don't adopt digital efficient mechanisms of delivery, you are handicapping yourself in a digital Darwinistic curve that's playing out in the industry. I deal with tens of them on a weekly basis, and they're all going digital. So the question really becomes, how do we actually, and why this forum is of such great relevance, is how do we better introduce this concept of right and wrong into these digital systems as they become democratized in every walk of human life? That's what's really the biggest part right now, is for us to be able to focus on, because I think we can jest about the fact that Musk may be totally off his mind, but I think the reality is that the Darwinistic curve, McKinsey has also talked about the fact, you just need to be able to look at like 40% of the Global 2000 having slipped off the curve from being Global 2000.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to, can I go back to David's point about the end of the commons and the need to restore the commons? And I want to ask the question, does AI have any role? It certainly has a role perhaps in the disruption of the commons, but does it have any role to play in the restoration of the commons? And what would that look like?
Could I just quickly insert here that imposing the question that way, I think it's a fantastic question. And I'd be interested to hear what others have to say about this. But as part of the consideration, one also needs to add in the concern that the digital has had an extraordinary, the production of the digital, its hardware, and the thinking that goes into it has had an extraordinary impact on the environment. And if we continue down this road, it will be relevant, precisely because we're not going to have much of anything to be able to, sort of fall back on. Even as we say, oh, we're going to produce food and we're going to do this and we're going to do that sort of more effectively and efficiently, and efficiently on one register, more destructively in terms of of all being, all living being, sort of on another register. And so that really does need to be part of not just a calculus, but a broader set of deliberations around what it is that we're doing with the earth for everybody.
Absolutely, David. I would agree that that's why I think it is very important to try and get those ethics built into these machines. I completely agree. And I think, how do we get these AIs to act in more responsible ways rather than the good? And Elizabeth was also pointing out the classic divide about does many things good and not some things not good, and has had pluses and minuses. How do we get those good things reinforced in such systems? And I think
Well, what happens when the computer like evaluates say its own environmental impact and decides that it's more ethical to not use technology?
Yeah, that's the, I think Dr. Broussard, that is where you start to approach singularity in the computers having that kind of, and I don't think that that's where, I think humans need to be continuing to be in the driver's seat of those issues. And I think humans need to continue to make these systems learn the right kind of conduct rather than the systems itself becoming self-deterministic of like what is right and what's wrong. So otherwise it is we do run into a dangerous situation when computers start to make these decisions by themselves. And I believe what is right and wrong, which is not control gated by humans. Humans must continue to be in the driver's seat. And for us to be in the driver's seat, we need to focus on the creative, which is outside the bounds of computing equipment. And we should not try and endeavor play on computing equipment's field, because they will win. If we try to say, I will be better at answering credit card replacement calls, or I'll be better at driving, I think it's going to be, driving should be elective. If you like driving, you should drive. Otherwise, if you don't like driving, you should be able to press a button and your faithful friend, computer, should be able to drive you. Your butler, as you call it, should be able to drive you. If you like vacuuming, you should vacuum. If you don't like vacuuming, you should be able to call your butler and he should be able to vacuum. Humans should have the most faithful friend in silicon forms that will come along and absolve us of 75% of our time that is lost in doing mundane chores and free us to be able to focus on creative only, which is a domain where we dominate.
But it's the doing of those mundane chores that humble us, right? I mean, I wonder. I do worry a bit. I mean, even as we say the technological will take over these sorts of things, that and humans are better at making these determinations. I'm not so sure humans are better at making these determinations if we look all around us, right? And the worry is of the following kind, that the extraordinary capacity of the technological to do things like mundane chores. I mean, think of packing in an Amazon warehouse, is that it doesn't just displace human labor. It actually puts pressure on human labor in particular sorts of ways to keep up with the technological. And I don't just mean as programmers, I mean, right, on the production line at Amazon, right? The fact that that robots are packing, 25%, are 3/4 faster than humans in packing a box in order to ship off, is causing people in the chain of delivery to have to work at the pace of the robotic rather than the other way around, which is producing injury and time off, leading to firing and so on and so forth, right? So there's a kind of eco-structure that gets put in place that has impacts exactly on the well-being of the human as a result of all of this, that needs to be sort of part of the sensibility of that commons that Robert was pointing us to.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think this is, you pointed out, David, it's a great tsunami of common chores that's going to come and wash ashore, and it's already starting to wash ashore. Man must move to a higher ground. If you like gardening, you should garden. If you like driving, you should drive. If you like vacuuming, you should vacuum. And if you like farming, Professor Broussard.
I thought you meant literally to a higher ground, which is true too, right?
Yeah, which you're going to have to do when the sea level rises.
Which is not unrelated to
because the glaciers are melting.
It's very true that we have to, because in human brain is continuing to be the biggest ultimate Darwinian engine. Given exactly as you said, restriction of the choices, when these common kinds of horse and carriage drivers started driving cars, and human brain continues over the period of time we have seen has continued to evolve. It'll continue to evolve. But what I worry about is that if the minds on this call, and in the minds much who dwarf mine, do not shape the world opinion, the speed of this cognitive transformation that Elizabeth pointed out, it's a cognitive multiplier. In the production line, when she has studied much more about this, when we had the first industrial revolution, it was still limited by the production capability. One man, one card. One steam engine, 100 cards, 100 times multiplier. But the production of the steam engine still gave man some time to be able to retool. When we talk about a cognitive multiplier, it's an infinite multiplier. If you just study the math, it's a 14.3 trillion impact in 9 years, as opposed to a 1.5 trillion impact in 55 years. It's 50-fold times. Elizabeth pointed that out very well. The speed of this transformation is so rapid. We have to be able to shape the opinions of the masses, and we have to be able to start to, and I'm encouraged by some of the governments that I've talked to in the House of Commons, for instance, they're already starting to say, it's our education system wired for this new world. Why are we teaching 13 times 13 squares of 169 and the same education that we were teaching about 100 years ago? Why are we not redoing our education system to be able to foster some of the creative thinking that is required for us to flourish in this digital era? That is not just coming, but is imminent. Listen, it is, before this year is out, 17% of the calls will be fielded by a digital employee. Fact. So why not start preparing us for that? Whether you argue whether it's going to be 2 years or 3 years, everybody knows that 5 years down the road, you're going to have the cars are going to be driven by robots. We know that. We know this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can ease off of the example of self-driving cars. 2020, like everybody swore that 2020 was going to be when self-driving cars hit the road. Like they're not hitting the road. They're not hitting the road anytime soon. Like that is a bad example of the future.
That's another one that we will actually have a conversation by 2025.
Yeah.
And see if,
you know what I'm enthusiastic about? The only thing I can get enthusiastic about in terms of autonomous driving is autonomous tractors. I can get excited about autonomous tractors because in a field, there's nobody around to be killed. You're going to like run over a frog and that's going to be tough for the frog, but it's not really a big deal. Although I've been saying this for a couple of years now, and then one day I was at some event and I was seated next to a guy who is a farmer and like does AI for seeds or something. And you're right, he was telling me about his family's farms in Canada, and he said, "Oh yeah, we have we have looked into getting some of this automated farming equipment, but the problem is mud. That heavy farm equipment often gets stuck in the mud, and so then you have to take your other tractor to pull your first tractor out of the mud." And he said, "Yeah, that's why we're never getting automated tractors." And I was a little disappointed that my idea about the automated tractor was.
Can they be made lighter?
Yeah.
Well, given that we have a proliferation of tree frogs here in the spring and here in North Carolina, I'm not all for automated tractors. They're going to run over them.
They're going to kill the frogs. Yeah.
Right, but let me try to circle back on a couple of things. So Meredith, in her opening remarks, talked about the homogeneity behind the programming of AI and the kind of coded biases that were implicit in that sort of homogeneity. And we talked a bit about how we might gesture toward changing incentive structures, particularly in the areas of environmental consequence, given an extractive industry that's behind AI, given damage to via mining practices and disposal practices with rare earth and lithium in particular, what the consequences are to our planet. But I wonder also if we might talk a bit about cultural differences and how cultural differences can be programmed into AI, and whether that's a moral or immoral or amoral practice. So, for example, Chetan, would a Chinese Amelia be programmed differently than an American Amelia?
Very, I was in Stockholm when I was asked by a board member from Every that why is she blonde and blue-eyed? Well, I kind of joked that like it's hard to find a person not blonde, blue-eyed in Stockholm. But I think yes, the answer is yes. There is cultural biases, and there are certain things that in Europe and America is considered okay, and in China it is considered different, red and other forms, and in basic colors and basic expression of language. All those things have to be, absolutely. We see that in Japan, for instance. She's called Kotoha, just as an example. And I asked the CEO of NTT.com about why Kotoha, because my Japanese is very rudimentary, basically arigato gozaimasu and and konnichiwa. And so I asked him, like, what is Kotoha? He said, oh, it's communicate to happiness, Kotoha. Of course, I was not augmenting my Japanese with that. But it is, to your point, yes, it has to be in a way. I also learned in Japan's case, for instance, that you have the number of adult diapers sold in the last 3 years in Japan exceeded the number of children's diapers in the last 3 years. And the need for companionship is so acute that in Tokyo, downtown, there is a mechanical emu that people go just to pet this mechanical form. And the ex-Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had in Industrial Society 5.0 had the thought about like creating these companions that Professor Broussard was saying a second ago, that you could have these companions that would understand you, be empathetic towards you, and provide you the companionship that is otherwise missing. Very different culturally in Japan to culturally in Americas, for instance, and in different parts of the world, very much different in at least what we have seen.
Yeah, those robot companions for elderly folks are just the saddest thing I can possibly imagine. Like, it just breaks my heart to imagine somebody old and alone who's imagining that this like metal blob covered in fur is its friend or is their friend. I mean, it's just so sad. And I would so much rather we have social supports for people as opposed to giving them, like giving them a stuffed animal with some metal parts inside. Stuffed animals, they're great, but it's just so sad. And Elizabeth, you're nodding. You find this sad as well?
No, I find it very sad. I'm in complete sympathy with you on all of these things, but what worries me is that the directions we're heading seem to lead us inevitably to substituting in these ways. And it's, instead of returning to something, what we might think of as more humane, we move increasingly toward these human-like embodiments that are supposed to relate to and interact with people. I just want to return to your point, Chetan, about education. Why aren't we educating people? Because most people have no idea how fast we're moving and what it will take, and wouldn't even begin to know how to develop the curriculum that we would need. Also, so that, yeah,
you're totally right. And it's also a matter of what we pay teachers.
Yeah. Exactly.
So kids don't graduate from Ivy League schools and go into public school teaching anymore
No.
because you don't make enough money as a public school teacher to pay your student loans at these massively expensive private colleges. And it used to be that the economic difference between being a doctor, a lawyer, and being a public school teacher, a social worker was not that like the two salaries were not that far apart. You could support a family as a solo breadwinner on, the salary of a public school teacher and on the doctor's salary. And now doctors make so much more than public school teachers that, the economic inequality has gotten out of control, but also it has dramatically affected who goes into teaching. And so if we're not paying our teachers well, then we're not developing the next generation at a sufficiently high level. Like, we need to pay our teachers more. We need to make teaching a better job. We also need more
a safer job too.
Yes, safer job.
We've seen the burnout with during the pandemic with so many people dropping out of teaching and nursing.
Exactly. Yeah. And we also need to reduce universities' reliance on adjuncts. Precarious academic labor is a big problem. People need job security. Like, the gig labor ethos, it's horrible. It's good for the people who own the companies, but it's not great for people who actually want job stability and long-term relationships with employers and coworkers. So Elizabeth, to go back to your point, I think that pushing back against techno-chauvinism is a really good first start. Like the idea that it's inevitable that computers are going to replace everything and that we're going to have more technology in every aspect of our lives, like that's a techno-chauvinist vision of the future. And I want people to push back against that. And I want people to say, hey, it's a bad idea to give robot stuffed animals to old people instead of going and visiting them. And, nothing is inevitable but the future. We have the ability to change it. We don't have to lie back and think of England when it comes to technology.
But I don't think it is chauvinism if it is benign. I mean, I think you're classifying everything about technology in one blanket sweep. And I think I agree with David and Elizabeth more about the fact that there are pluses and minuses to it. I can tell you that I was at the Prime Minister's office in India, where I discovered that there are 472 million Indians that have got a mobile phone, and over half of them do not have qualified healthcare. If you could provide qualified healthcare to these people through their mobile telephones that they all have, then think about 250 million people's lives that you could change. So it's not all about chauvinism. You don't devote your life because you have just some self-aggrandized, grandiose vision of yourself. I think you devote your life because you think it can have a positive, benign impact. I think the idea of this forum, to my mind, is to be able to police this effectively so that the technology can be gainful, so we can uplift the constructive part that David and Elizabeth have more balanced pointed out, the pluses and minuses. We need to be able to uplift the pluses and diminish the negatives of such things that is inevitable with any such transformative change. And that's my cent and a half in this regard.
Well, Elizabeth, I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit and share with the audience a bit about your discoveries in the Humane Technology Project, this wonderful project that you're engaged in, to address some of the points that have been raised.
I appreciate the question. We're looking at humane technologies and ethical innovation is the way we think about our enterprise. And we've engaged scholars from all around the United States, scholars as well as technologists and people in business, to meet with us in a sort of design studio format, which is really about participant action. And so it's not just us talking, but drawing on the expertise, this combined expertise to think about the positives and the negatives of technology. Certainly during this pandemic, we have all been grateful at times for the affordances of technology, bringing, food to our products to our doors, friends and family through Zoom into our homes. But we've also succumbed to Zoom exhaustion. We're tired of the time distracting depletion of the constant, presence of technology, screen addiction for children. There are all these issues we're grappling with. And we really need to have fora in which we begin to grapple with the positives and negatives together. I mean, I'm just thinking about what you're talking about, Chetan, all this GDP growth. And then I think about what Meredith said, and I think, but we're not investing in teachers. We're not investing in nursing. We're not investing in nursing home care. I mean, we could be building up these professions and building a world of human, a new commons, if you like, to take David's sense. But so that's what we're engaged in. And just listening to everyone here has been so interesting and informative and exciting, really, to keep this conversation going.
I'm going to move to a couple of questions from the audience, if I may, to get them involved. And the first question that I want to move to, excuse me, I'm dealing with two different screens here. I think this is a good question for David. It seems like much of the discourse around AI centers around capitalist values of efficiency, productivity, and progress. Since these are not universal values or even inherently good values, to what extent is it ethical or moral to center those values in technology?
I think that's a good question. I mean, much of the conversation around the value of AI is a growth model, and critics have pointed out the limits and concerns around growth. I mean, I think of the degrowthers like Georgios Kallios, I think is his name, the Greek economist who's writing really interestingly about degrowth, works both in Barcelona and London. And so, it's clear that if we do not attend to the kinds of concerns embedded, implicit in the question around concerns of efficiency, profitability, and progress, which are central values, one could say, of modernity, from, I don't know, the 16th century onwards, increasingly, that we're not going to have much to be able to draw on, just in terms of the resources available to us in the future. We're not going to be able to technologize ourselves out of the morass that we've created for ourselves through this period. It's just not, for every technological solution, for every technological endeavor that's supposed to address climate change, or that's supposed to address these kinds of concerns, that very proposed solution has embedded within it limitations and constraints, indeed some of which then reproduce, if not further produce, the very problem that is at issue. Whether it's self-driving cars, what are the energy sources that self-driving cars draw on? Whether it's other forms of efficient delivery of product, and so on and so forth. So, unless and until we address those baseline conditions and the kinds of values embedded within them that the question is pointing to, we're on a one-way ticket to self-destruction. I mean, I hate to put it so bluntly, but I think all the evidence shows that.
Anyone else want to comment on that question?
I'll agree.
Yeah,
let me move to, go on. Chetan.
No, I agree with David. I think that's why I think it is very, very important that the last part is a very accurate summation, that unless we start gainfully directing such technologies that can and are being transformative, we do run the risk of, look, Carl Sagan, professor in your neighborhood, David, he argues that every civilization has reached a certain pinnacle and self-destructed itself. The Egyptians did it, the Mesopotamians did it, the Romans did it. So what is it to say that the humans are not reaching a similar pinnacle? And so Professor Sagan argues that. And so absolutely, you make a very valid point. And that's why I've been imploring to any ears that would listen, that I think it is very important with such a tectonic and seismic change in progress that is 50 times the speed of normal changes that happened even in the first industrial revolution. It is imperative that thinking minds direct the technology in a gainful manner.
Let me say that, previous modes of destruction, whether one calls it of civilization, of a particular civilization or not, have been more or less localized, precisely because of the demographic kind of distribution. What is probably, I would say, absolutely new about our current condition is that it's the end of being human. It's the end of the conditions of possibility of sustaining ourselves. And unless and until we wake up to that fact, we're in deep trouble.
Agreed.
There's a question for Meredith specifically, but others can comment as well. Can you talk about the relationship between techno-chauvinism and technological determinism?
They're very much kindred concepts. I specifically say techno-chauvinism because I wanted to reference a certain kind of male-dominated thinking inside big tech. The way that a white male Ivy League mathematician ethos has dominated not only the narrative about technology, but all of the economics and the economic conversation inside technology. I mean, a lot of those notes have been hit here today. They're the same notes we hear all the time, and there's a narrative beyond that. And it's important to expand the conversation and to address issues of race and gender and intersectionality when we're talking about the forward movement of technology.
Could I just add, okay, this is semi-lighthearted. When you made the comment earlier about having a baby, it struck me that maybe technological development is the way in which men have a baby.
Yeah, or maybe they're jealous of women's ability to have babies.
I mean, that's
actually like on a more Freudian level. I think that's
subtext.
What's going on.
I was going to preface it with that. Yes.
Well, I won't go to metaphors about labor here.
I don't know. We might be deep enough into the Zoom fatigue that it might be warranted.
Right. So let me go to another question. And I'd like Elizabeth perhaps to initially respond, and of course anyone else should as well. What would it look like if we started with the humane? What is humane? Who is eligible? Who is this preferable for rather than the tech?
Excellent question. What would it mean if we started with the humane, and what is the humane? Okay, that might lead us into certain cultural specifications. I just want to say that at the outset, but it seems to me that what it would mean is just to talk first about, well, what David referred to as the commons, what we need and want as a people. As human beings, what nourishes us, what gives meaning to our lives, what gives sense to our lives, and then think about how technology could fit into that. But we're driven by the technology, and the human limps along after, it seems to me, and really is in some sense being discarded, because it sometimes seems, I think, in technological advancement to get in the way. And we aren't able to consider so many of the things that Meredith pointed to about race and gender and intersectionality and all of those things too that make up the human complexity and the humane ultimately.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to move to another question. This is a question from an engineering professor who is very much involved in sort of second wave AI. And I'll address this initially to you, Chetan. And the questioner asked you to comment on a Scientific American article stating that when we expose the AI neural networks to states analogous to the waves that living brains experienced during sleep, that stability was restored to those AI neural networks, presuming, I guess, that there was some instability through lack of sleep.
Yeah, then this is I'm familiar with this work, and I think it is very transformative work, because it is what he's stating is actually accurate. And in fact, I've seen in Paris, I can tell you, I was in Paris where their CEO showed me where you could attach these things to your, and you could move with your brain, you could move soccer balls that were just through your brain thinking. That was because what's going on in your brain, and we have studied this, the theory of spread activation, that synapses beta attenuate over a period of time. And it's nothing but electrical impulses that are going through your brain. And if you connect them and you see the certain patterns, you can actually start to move certain things. Now, that's obviously, as earlier in the talk also we discussed, it was in the state of infancy. But I've seen people play soccer with just these attached to your brain. With sleep, you do have the ability to get your neural networks to be able to perform in better ways. But it's also about these networks are continuously rewiring themselves. And that's where reinforcement learning is continuously rewiring by this. The sequence is a loopback unit, which continuously feeds back into our systems as our networks of 88 billion neurons continuously rewire themselves. So I've seen this in action, and it's a very astute observation.
Great. For concluding comments, I'm going to go back to alphabetical sequence, if I may. And I'm going to ask a question that I'd like each of you to sort of speculate on, to comment on, to reflect on. So we'll start with Meredith. And the question is, what would success look like in a decade? What might be present in the world that isn't now?
Well, that's a good question. What I would like is, I would like to see an end to techno-chauvinism. I would like to see redistribution of wealth so that the wealth is not concentrated in the hands of a few. I would like to see people have options to opt out of using technology. I would like a dramatic decrease in surveillance technology. I would like to see a commitment to racial and gender equality all over the world. And I would like people to give up on the idea of making a human out of a machine, and just admit that we already have a very efficient and very pleasant mechanism for making new humans, and the machines are just machines, and we should use them like machines and not anthropomorphize them.
Okay. Chetan.
Well, in the next decade, I'd like to see machines come along and basically alleviate us and lift the shackles of ordinary work that currently ties down majority of our times. I'd like machines to come along and boost up the global productivity to such an extent that if governments get their act together and can redistribute the wealth gainfully, we can eliminate some big problems of child hunger and other such things, which otherwise would not be possible. I'd like machines to come along and be that most faithful servant that says, I will take care of all mundane chores for you, sir. So it is elective for you if you prefer to be farming or if you prefer to be driving, but I will make sure that you have the capability of going ahead and engaging and not worrying about subsistence, but engaging in creative expression, which is what I call higher ground. And I think man will create many more beautiful things, and the advancement will go much more. If 75% of our brain, which is currently shackled by the ordinary, gets freed, that's what I would like to see happen in the next decade with machines coming along.
Thank you, Chetan. David.
Yeah, I would say if we are less close to self-destruction, we would have achieved a measure of success. And if technology is capable of helping us, as Chetan put it, to address those kinds of problems, those kinds of issues in ways that really, to put Meredith and Chetan together in, I hope, what would be a sort of combinatorial way, to get to a point that addresses these problematics in ways that are conducive to bettering the lives of all equally, of enablement, of asking people what they need rather than telling them what they need. Meredith mentioned surveillance. I've just finished, a book will be out soon that has a long chapter on what I call tracking capitalism. Absolutely to undo tracking. I mean, it is, tracking has become central to that logic of John Stuart Mill's consideration of creating new desire, of creating desire you don't really know that you want or perhaps even want, and then it sort of drives one to consume more, right? And I think finding a way to undo that model, so it's both technological and counter-technological, and that I think will count as a measure of success. And I would say, if we are on Zoom less and without shattering the environment, able to be in the same room together, that would be a good thing too.
Thank you, David. Elizabeth. Being
in the same room together, that sounds welcome. And I just would say that I agree with, I've heard so many wonderful things today and now from my colleagues, and thinking myself too about what Shoshana Zuboff said about surveillance technology, to go to the point most recently addressed, that if the Industrial Revolution, the first Industrial Revolution, if you like, perhaps destroyed the natural world, the threat of this technological revolution is that it will destroy human nature. And that's what we've been talking about, whether we let the technology destroy human nature, or we find a way to use the technology, to make the technology our servant so we don't become its, so that we can become really constructive in what happens in the world ahead of us.
Thank you very much. We in the humanities, of course, always love to foster a culture of debate. I think we've had that here, a very respectful, profound interchange of ideas. Thank you all for your very, very thoughtful and provocative commentaries. And I want to thank everyone who participated in today's conversation. I also want to thank our conference sponsors who are listed in the description box below this video. And I want to remind our audience that we will reconvene for more in our image artificial intelligence in the humanities conference sessions on Monday afternoon with a panel discussing the issues of representation in film and AI. That panel is being moderated by Wesley Hogan, who is the director of the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University. And Wesley will be joined by Natalie Bullock-Brown and Marcia Gordon, both film scholars from North Carolina State University, and Shalini Kataya, who is the director and producer of the award-winning documentary Coded Bias. They'll be discussing Coded Bias and the other films in the series being presented as part of this conference, which I hope you will watch if you haven't already done so. There is free access to these films. It's available for all of our registrants, all of our, I should say, 1,200 registrants from 10 different countries on our conference website. That panel and next week's other sessions will continue and expand upon the amazing conversations that we've already seen as part of the conference. And you can find provocations and readings to spur your thinking ahead of next week's panels by visiting the conference pages on the center's website, nationalhumanitiescenter.org. Thanks again to everyone, and I look forward to seeing you next week.